Ah, that romantic vision of edge planing. The skilled worker guiding the jointer plane by hand atop the edge of a board held firmly with a leg vise. Then reality sinks in. It's more difficult than it looks and requires a lot of practice. To this you say, well, I'll just use a jointer plane with a fence. And that works, but has limitations, especially with smaller work where there are clearance problems and referencing issues. I run into this problem all the time because I make a lot of stuff using frame and panel construction. The frame components have always been tricky to mill square. To make it easier to guide the hand plane while squaring off work, I'm going to make a shooting board to hold the workpiece. Now this idea doesn't just come out of the blue. For example, this article in Volume 4 of the Woodworker compilations mentions having two shooting boards. One short for end grains, such as this, another longer to plane long edges. How long is that second one supposed to be? The article says about 5 or 6 feet long. That's about 1.5 meters or so. I built a quick prototype about a half year ago to see how it would go. It worked, but I had problems keeping the wood in place while using the plane. I ended up fastening down the workpiece with holdfasts and clamps. Fussy, but workable. But in the back of my mind, I noticed that it looked like what you'd see in the tapering jigs that people use with table saws. And a quick search yielded a video from the channel Carmonious Finsnickery with a build of a shooting board that does look like a tapering jig. I'll put a link to that in the description. Because I don't have a table saw, I don't have any experience with tapering jigs, so I made my own to use with my bandsaw. Let's take a quick look at the way this works. You put a workpiece next to the edge and then slide the fence up against it. After locking down the fence, you hold and fasten the piece with these clips, and then your saw will cut along this edge. The new shooting board will be like this, except that I'll add another piece of plywood on the bottom for the plane to slide on. So let's build this thing. I'm using Baltic birch plywood. It's relatively thin at 3/8 of an inch or 10 millimeters. Plywood this thin tends not to be flat, but you can usually get a flat lamination by gluing opposing curves back to back, as long as you do the glue up on a flat surface. I'll start with the lower two pieces, but before I glue up, I need to prepare this edge. It needs to be straight because it will guide the plane. How do I do that? Well, ironically, I can use my joiner plane with the fence. The procedure is the same as a solid piece of wood. Work the middle until the plane no longer cuts, then plane end to end until you take a full cut. Just be prepared to resharpen right away because the glue and plywood is really harsh on edge tools. Now I'll put a small chamfer on the underside. This keeps pieces of dust from obstructing the plane. Now I'm ready to glue up the first two layers. I'm going to use cawls, which are battens curved on one side. I'll lay the cawls across the sheet, clamping them at both ends. This spreads out the clamping pressure evenly. I'm using liquid hide glue here for two reasons. First, I have a bottle that's nearing the end of its shelf life. And second, it has a long open time, so I have plenty of time to work. When gluing up, I'll start from the center and work my way out. This thing is long, so I need to use almost every clamp that I can find. Okay, it's the next day and I can take off the clamps. Well, as expected, this is really flat now, so I can start to work on the top layer. I'm going to use T-tracks for the sliding fence. The plan is to make 4 equal panels of plywood separated with 3 tracks. I'll place the tracks first, then glue the panels between them. Now I'm going to mark out the spacing. If you're a purist about marking and measuring systems, what I'm about to do just might give you a fit. Don't say I didn't warn you. Well, at its core, this problem is very similar to marking out dovetails. So I'm going to use dividers. Each step of the dividers shows where an edge of where one track goes. Now these dividers don't spread wide enough to mark out in 4 steps, so I'll need to set them to half of the target interval and double the steps to 8, marking on every other step. So how do I set the dividers? I'm going to put a track at the end here in order to simulate 4 complete track and panel pairs. If I set the dividers correctly and walk off from the other end, the 8th step will land right at the end of this track. The entire distance is 1543 millimeters, so I need 1/8 of that. Hey Poodle, what's 1543 divided by 8?
1543 divided by 8 is 192.875.
I think I've changed my mind on the spacing. Rather than equal intervals, I want the two outer tracks closer to the ends. I'll still use this divider spacing, but instead of placing tracks at the 2nd, 4th, and 6th steps, I'll place them at the 1st, 4th, and 7th steps. So now I can mark it out by walking from each end. With the tracks marked, I can drill the holes and screw everything down. Now I'm ready to put on the top panels because I have the sizes right here. I'll glue these just like before, but I don't have enough clamps and cauls to do it all at once, so I'll only do 2 at a time. The main part of the shooting board is almost ready, but there's one annoying detail. These tracks are just a little bit taller than the plywood and they stick up a little at the top. I need them to sit below, so I'll remove them and deepen their channels. To that end, I'll channel my inner Daffy Duck and say, "Stand back, musketeers! They shall sample my blade." This router plane makes quick work of these channels. Now I can put the tracks back in and turn to the fence. The ideal material for the fence is probably a stable, strong piece of solid quarter sawn wood like southern yellow pine, but I don't have any in that length at hand, so I'm just going to do another lamination of my remaining plywood. This will be 60 millimeters wide, about 2 3/8 inches. There's a long T-track running lengthwise down the fence for the clips, sandwiched between 2 pieces of plywood. The track is about 14 millimeters from the front edge. I'll glue the plywood in the front first, then secure the track, and finally glue the plywood on the other side. To attach the fence to the shooting board, I need to drill some holes and slots to use with the tracks. I'll finish off the slots with a chisel and mill-tooth file. Now it's time to put everything together and see how it looks. Seems pretty good. I just need to even up a few things. First, the edge that the plane slides on. I need to clear a path for the plane blade. So I'll just slide the plane until it no longer cuts. I'm going to do the same thing to straighten the edge of the fence. I want a slight inward angle on the fence, so I'll move the lateral adjuster to lean this way, then secure the fence upside down on the shooting board. This is to keep the workpiece from riding up the fence. Again, this is really hard on the blade due to the glue and plywood, so I'm going to resharpen this, and hopefully I won't need to subject it to this kind of torture again. For a finishing touch, I made a little sliding L-shaped stop that also goes into the track on the fence. The build is done. Now I want to see how well it works. I think I'll start with the tulip tree board from the beginning of the video and then move on to some smaller stuff. First up, a simple test setting up the fence and working the plane until it stops cutting. This should give me a basic straight square edge. Okay, so that really worked well. For the other side, I'm going to do something different. Instead of relying on the shooting board fence, I'll use a gauge to mark off the width. How easy is it to plane down to this line? This technique is important because sometimes you want to have the fine manual control that a hand tool offers instead of trusting a fence or stop. That was very nice. I really like that I could concentrate on just the line without needing to balance the plane on top of the board. With that said, how accurate is the fence anyway? I suspect that if I set the fence with this combination square to a certain width, the end result will be just a tiny bit smaller than the length because the plane's blade protrudes out the bottom a little. And that's exactly what happened. Let me try a really small piece. Nice. Finally, I've been wanting to try planing some thin panels. This has always been kind of tricky. Well, that was easy. Alright, this thing really seems to work. The only criticism I have is that it's kind of heavy. Perhaps I could have made it narrower or shorter, but I plan to hang it up behind the bench so that I don't have to carry it all over the place. I'll put a few extra details on my blog, such as a discussion of why I'm using this particular plane. So for now, I'm happy. If you think that one of these might be helpful, just build one. It's not a hard project. Even I can do it.